Revenge with Marvella. The mashed potatoes sat untouched on my plate as Marcus leaned back in his chair, smirking across the table at me. My sister Claire's dining room felt smaller than usual, the air thick with tension I pretended not to notice. Marcus had been drinking since we arrived, his voice getting louder with each glass of wine. "So, Alex," he said, drawing out my name mockingly. "Tell everyone about your service again. What was it you did? Pushed papers? Filed reports?" He laughed, a sharp sound that made Claire look down at her plate. "I mean, real soldiers actually see combat. They don't sit behind desks playing secretary." The other family members went silent. My mother shifted uncomfortably. My father cleared his throat, but said nothing. Claire stabbed at her green beans, refusing to meet my eyes. I'd heard versions of this before from Marcus, usually when he'd had too much to drink, but never this direct. Never this cruel. I smiled tightly and took a sip of water. Something inside me cracked, but I kept my face neutral. Years of training had taught me control. Marcus wasn't finished. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, grinning like he'd won something. "What was your little nickname again?" he asked, deliberately mangling my name. "Alexandra? Or was there some cute military thing they called you?" I set down my fork carefully. "Phantom," I said quietly. The word hung in the air. I watched his expression flicker, just for half a second, before he laughed it off. "Phantom? That's adorable. Did you haunt the copy machine?" Nobody laughed with him this time. I didn't explain what the call sign meant. I didn't tell them about the night I earned it, or why only certain people ever used it. I didn't mention the missions that still woke me up sweating at 3 in the morning. Marcus drained his wine glass. "Well, at least I'm getting somewhere real now. My new commander is actually impressive. Colonel James Patterson. He's a legend. Led operations in." My stomach dropped. I knew that name. I knew it very well. I went quiet after that. The dinner dragged on, but I barely tasted the food. I smiled when appropriate, nodded at the right moments, but my mind was racing. James Patterson. It couldn't be the same person. It had been years. He'd been a captain then, not a colonel. That night, Claire texted me, "Please don't make a big deal out of tonight. Marcus was just joking around. You know how he is. Don't embarrass him." I stared at the message for a long time. Not, "I'm sorry he hurt you." Not, "That was inappropriate." Just, "Don't embarrass him." My own sister had chosen her side, and it wasn't mine. I didn't reply. Instead, I stopped trying to explain myself to anyone. I'd spent years downplaying my service, making it smaller so others would feel comfortable. I was done with that. I opened my laptop and searched for Colonel James Patterson. The search results loaded slowly, and then I saw it, a photograph from a recent military ceremony. My breath caught in my throat. I recognized him instantly. The memories came flooding back, sharp and unwelcome. Afghanistan, 2019. The compound was supposed to be clear. Intelligence had confirmed it. We went in with confidence, a routine extraction that should have taken 20 minutes. It took 6 hours. Everything went wrong. The intelligence was bad. We were ambushed. 3 of our team members were pinned down in a building that was rapidly filling with smoke. I can still hear their voices on the radio, calm at first, then desperate. I can still smell the burning metal and taste the dust. I'd gone back for them when everyone else said it was suicide. I'd moved through that compound like a ghost, silent and invisible, using every shadow, every piece of cover. That's why they started calling me Phantom. Not because I hid from danger, but because I moved through it unseen. Captain Patterson had been there that night, coordinating from the operations center. He'd heard everything on the radio. He'd been the one who authorized my movement when the senior officer wanted to pull everyone back. The next family gathering was Claire's birthday party 2 weeks later. Marcus held court in the backyard, beer in hand, telling stories to anyone who would listen. I arrived late, hoping to avoid him, but he spotted me immediately. "There she is. The paper pusher." He grinned, pulling me into a one-armed hug that felt more like a trap. "Come on, sit down." I was just telling everyone about my deployment. I sat on the edge of the group and listened. He talked about Iraq, about missions and firefights. He mentioned bases I knew, units I'd worked with. As he spoke, I caught the errors. Small things at first, wrong timeline for when certain units were deployed. A base that didn't exist in the location he claimed. Details that wouldn't matter to civilians, but stood out like sirens to anyone who'd actually served. Then he said it. I was actually part of the operation that extracted those 3 soldiers from that compound in Kandahar. Crazy night. We went in hot, pulled them out just before the whole place collapsed. My blood ran cold. He was talking about my mission. My operation. But he'd never been there. I left the party early, my hands shaking as I drove home. I sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes, trying to decide what to do. Marcus wasn't just exaggerating anymore. He was lying. He was claiming credit for something he hadn't done, something that had nearly cost me everything. I went inside and pulled out the encrypted external drive I kept in my closet. I hadn't touched it in 3 years. The password took me 2 tries to remember, my fingers fumbling on the keyboard. When it finally opened, folders appeared on my screen. Mission reports, commendations, communications logs. Everything carefully documented and backed up before I'd left active service. I scrolled through the files, looking for that night. The operation Marcus had just claimed as his own. When I found it, I clicked on the folder and saw the mission brief, the after-action report, the radio transcripts. At the top of the first document, next to my service number, was my call sign, Phantom. The file was flagged with a small red icon. Classified. Still active in certain databases. I debated for 3 days before I made the decision. I wasn't looking for revenge. I just needed to know if I was wrong, if maybe Marcus had been there in some capacity I didn't know about. Maybe I'd missed something. I opened an old secure email account, one I'd used for official communications. I didn't use my civilian name. I typed my call sign in the subject line and sent a message to a contact I hadn't spoken to in 4 years, someone who would still have access to personnel records, someone I trusted. The message was simple: need to verify service record. Name, Marcus Chen. Claims participation in Operation Greystone, Kandahar Province, October 2019. I hit send and closed my laptop, not expecting a response for days. The reply came back in under 5 minutes. Is this really you? 3 words on my screen. I stared at them, my heart pounding. The sender was a friend from my unit, someone who'd moved into intelligence work after we'd both rotated home. Someone who knew exactly what my call sign meant. I replied, yes. It's me. Phantom. Holy hell. We thought you'd gone completely civilian. Your call sign is still active in the system. Still flagged for priority communications. People still talk about that night, you know. I hadn't known. I'd left that world behind, or tried to. I'd built a quiet civilian life, working as a logistics coordinator for a shipping company. Nothing glamorous. Nothing that required me to explain my past. I need to ask you something, I typed. Marcus Chen. Was he present during Greystone? The 3 dots appeared, showing my contact was typing. They disappeared. Appeared again. Finally, the message came through. Is he lying? I didn't answer directly. Instead, I sent facts. Dates, units, locations. I sent the timeline of where Marcus claimed to have been versus where military records would show his actual postings. I sent no accusations, no emotional appeals. Just verifiable information. My contact went silent for 10 minutes. Then, give me 48 hours. I closed my laptop and tried to go about my normal life. I went to work. I ate meals. I slept poorly. I didn't tell anyone what I'd done. There was a chance nothing would come of it. A chance the system would ignore it. A chance I was making something out of nothing. 2 days later, Marcus posted on social media about unexpected orders. His tone was excited, almost giddy. He'd been invited to attend some kind of command-level event. Special invitation. A big deal. Claire called me that evening, breathless. Did you hear? Marcus is being recognized. There's this event next month, and he's been personally invited. The commander himself requested his presence. I felt my chest tighten. That's great, I managed to say. She didn't hear the flatness in my voice. The family dinner to celebrate Marcus's invitation was excruciating. He sat at the head of the table like a king, talking about how real service gets noticed eventually. He looked directly at me when he said it, that same smirk on his face. Claire beamed with pride beside him. My mother congratulated him. My father shook his hand. Nobody asked me about my day, my work, my life. I was invisible again, just like I'd been at every family gathering since Marcus entered the picture. They want to honor the people who made a real difference, Marcus continued. People who actually put their lives on the line. Not everyone gets invited to something like this. I smiled and said nothing. I excused myself early, claiming I had an early morning meeting. Nobody tried to stop me. When I got home, I checked my email. Buried in my inbox, between spam messages and work memos, was a message with an official military header. My hands trembled as I opened it. It wasn't a summons. It was an invitation. Addressed to Phantom, not to Alex. An official request for my presence at a command recognition ceremony. The event was mandatory for Marcus. Optional for me. I read the email 3 times, trying to make sense of it. The ceremony was to honor those who exemplified courage, integrity, and sacrifice in the line of duty. There would be speeches. Recognition. A gathering of current and former service members. At the bottom of the email was a personal note. Your presence would be meaningful. We haven't forgotten. JP. James Patterson. Colonel James Patterson. He knew I'd be invited. He knew what this meant. I sat with the decision for a week. Part of me wanted to stay home, to avoid the confrontation entirely. But another part, the part that had gone back into that burning compound, the part that had earned the name Phantom, refused to hide. I RSVP'd yes. No explanation. No message to Marcus or Claire. Just a quiet confirmation that I would attend. The night before the event, I pulled my old dress uniform from the back of my closet. It still fit, though I'd never planned to wear it again. I didn't plan to wear it tomorrow either. I would go as a civilian, dressed plainly. No medals. No ribbons. Just me. The venue was a hotel conference center on the edge of the city. I arrived early, parking in the back lot. I wore simple black pants and a gray blouse, nothing that would draw attention. I signed in at the registration desk using my call sign. The young soldier manning the desk looked at me twice, then at his list, then back at me. Ma'am, he said quietly, standing straighter. It's an honor. I didn't know how to respond to that, so I just nodded and took my name tag. I found a seat near the back of the room, away from the main cluster of attendees. Marcus arrived 20 minutes later with Claire on his arm. He wore his dress uniform, chest full of ribbons. He preened as people greeted him, shaking hands and laughing. He didn't see me. I'd chosen my seat carefully. The room filled slowly. Senior officers, enlisted personnel, veterans. The atmosphere was respectful, subdued. This wasn't a party. It was something more serious. Then Colonel James Patterson stepped onto the stage. He looked older than I remembered, gray threading through his hair, new lines around his eyes. But his voice was the same, calm, authoritative, genuine. He stood at the podium and waited for the room to quiet. Thank you all for being here, he began. Today we talk about something that's often forgotten in the noise of military culture. We talk about integrity, about truth, about honoring the people who carried others through impossible nights, not because they wanted glory, but because it was right. I watched Marcus shift in his seat near the front. He glanced around, smiled at someone. Still confident. Still unaware. We live in a world where stories get told and retold, Patterson continued. Sometimes they grow in the telling. Sometimes people claim credit for things they witnessed rather than things they did. And sometimes, the people who actually did the hard work stay silent because they're too humble or too tired to correct the record. Marcus stopped smiling. His posture changed, became more rigid. Patterson looked down at his notes, then back at the audience. I want to tell you about someone we called Phantom. The room went completely silent. I felt every muscle in my body tense. Marcus's head whipped around, scanning the room, searching. He looked confused, then worried. His face started to lose color. Phantom earned that call sign during Operation Greystone, Patterson said. October 2019. Kandahar Province. 3 members of an extraction team were trapped in a compound under heavy fire. The building was compromised, filling with smoke. Standard protocol said to pull back, wait for air support, reassess. He paused, letting the words settle. Phantom didn't follow standard protocol. Phantom went back in. Alone. Moving through hostile territory like a ghost, using training and instinct that most of us only read about in manuals. Phantom reached those 3 soldiers and guided them out through a route nobody else could have navigated. All 3 lived. Phantom never asked for recognition. Marcus was sweating now. I could see it from across the room. Colonel Patterson looked directly at my section of the audience. Phantom, would you please stand? My legs moved before my brain fully processed the request. I stood, feeling hundreds of eyes turned toward me. The woman in plain clothes at the back of the room. No uniform. No ribbons. Just me. Patterson's face broke into a genuine smile. There you are, he said, and I heard relief in his voice. Ladies and gentlemen, meet Alex Morrison. Call sign, Phantom. He didn't use my full rank or my service number. He didn't need to. The respect in his voice said everything. I saw Marcus turn fully around in his seat, his face now completely white. His mouth opened, then closed. Claire sat frozen beside him, her hand over her mouth. Patterson gestured for me to remain standing. Alex hasn't worn a uniform in 3 years. She works in civilian logistics now. She doesn't talk about her service. She doesn't brag about what she did. She's exactly the kind of person we should be honoring today. He turned his attention to Marcus. The room followed his gaze. Marcus Chin, Patterson said calmly. Would you mind standing as well? Marcus stood slowly, mechanically. His hands were shaking. I could see them from across the room. Marcus, I understand you've been telling people about Operation Greystone, Patterson said. His tone wasn't accusatory. It was simply matter of fact, which somehow made it worse. You've mentioned being part of the extraction team. Being there when those 3 soldiers were pulled from the compound. Marcus nodded weakly, unable to speak. Can you tell me which unit you were attached to during that operation? Patterson asked. I was. Marcus stammered. He looked at Claire, then at me, then back at Patterson. Support operations. Support operations for which battalion? The 3rd. 3rd what, Marcus? Marcus's story started to unravel. He contradicted himself. He mixed up dates, locations, unit designations. The more he talked, the deeper he dug himself. People in the audience began to whisper. Senior officers exchanged glances. Patterson let him struggle for a moment longer, then held up a hand. That's enough. Thank you. He pulled a tablet from the podium. I have the personnel records here. Patterson read from the screen, his voice still calm but now edged with disappointment. During October 2019, Marcus Chin was stationed at Camp Victory in Iraq, serving in a logistics capacity. He was never deployed to Afghanistan. He was never part of Operation Greystone. He was never in Kandahar province during the dates in question. The room was silent except for someone's shocked intake of breath. The records show exemplary service in your actual role, Patterson continued, looking at Marcus. Good evaluations. Solid work. But somewhere along the way, you started claiming credit for operations you didn't participate in. Missions you didn't run. Risks you didn't take. Marcus sat down heavily, his face buried in his hands. Claire grabbed his arm, confused and horrified. This isn't criminal, Patterson said. But it violates the core value we're supposed to embody, integrity. When you claim someone else's service as your own, you don't just lie. You disrespect everyone who actually did the work. He looked back at me, still standing at the back of the room. Which brings me to an important question. The question that really matters from that night. He paused. Who actually saved those 3 soldiers? Patterson told the room what really happened. He described the radio traffic, the chaos, the moment when I'd volunteered to go back in against orders. He explained how I'd used smoke grenades and carefully timed movements to reach the trapped team. How I'd found a drainage tunnel that wasn't on any map and led them through it to safety. Phantom didn't just save 3 lives that night, he said. Phantom showed us what real courage looks like. Not the loud, showy kind. The quiet kind. The kind that doesn't need applause. I felt tears prickling at my eyes but refused to let them fall. People were standing now, turning to look at me. Some were applauding. A few saluted. I stood there, overwhelmed, wishing I could disappear. But I'd spent too many years disappearing. Too many years making myself smaller. This time I stood tall. Patterson nodded at me, a gesture of respect between soldiers. I nodded back. Then I saw Claire. She was crying, her face red and blotchy. Marcus sat beside her, completely broken. Neither of them looked at each other. After the ceremony ended, I tried to slip out quietly, but Marcus caught me in the parking lot. He was alone, his uniform jacket unbuttoned, his face desperate. "You did this," he hissed, grabbing my arm. "You set me up. You got me invited here just to humiliate me." I pulled my arm free. "I didn't invite you, Marcus. The military did. I didn't expose you either." "Then who?" "You did," I said quietly. "You exposed yourself. The moment you started lying about your service, claiming credit for missions you didn't run, you set this in motion. I just asked someone to verify the truth." "My career is over," he said, his voice breaking. "Do you understand that? Everything I worked for. You worked for." I felt anger rising in my chest. "Marcus, I actually did the things you lied about. I lived through the things you turned into party stories. And you mocked me for it. You called my service nothing while stealing credit for my missions." He started to respond, but a senior officer appeared, calling his name. Marcus's face went pale again. "You need to come with me," the officer said. It wasn't a request. The fallout happened quickly. Marcus was reassigned within the week. No promotion. No leadership track. No special recognition. The story spread through military channels the way these things do, not officially, but thoroughly. People talked. Word got around. His career wasn't destroyed, but it would never be what he'd hoped. He'd always be the guy who lied about his service. The guy who claimed someone else's mission. 2 weeks after the ceremony, Claire showed up at my apartment. I almost didn't let her in. I stood in the doorway, waiting for her to speak. "Please," she said, her voice small. "He's falling apart. His reputation is ruined. You have to help him." "Help him how?" "Call someone. Explain that it was a misunderstanding. Tell them he just misremembered. That he got confused about dates." I stared at my sister, truly seeing her for the first time in years. She wasn't asking because she thought Marcus deserved help. She was asking because his failure reflected on her. "Where were you?" I asked quietly. "What?" "Where were you when he mocked my service?" I continued. "When he called me a paper pusher. When he laughed at my call sign. When he told everyone I wasn't a real soldier." Claire looked away. "He was just joking." "No," I cut her off. "He was cruel. And you said nothing. You never defended me. You never asked him to stop. You texted me to tell me not to embarrass him, but you never once considered how he embarrassed me." "He's my husband," she said weakly. "And I'm your sister. I was your sister first." She started crying again, but this time I felt nothing. No sympathy. No guilt. Just a cold clarity about who she'd chosen to be. "I can't help him," I said. "Even if I wanted to, even if I called every contact I have, it wouldn't matter." "He lied, Claire. He claimed credit for a mission that almost killed me. He stole valor from people who earned it. The military doesn't forgive that." "But I defended this country," I said, my voice steady. "I saved lives. I did the things he pretended to do. And you stood by while he mocked me for it. Now you want me to save him from the consequences of his own lies?" "No." Claire left without another word. I closed the door and stood in my quiet apartment, feeling lighter than I had in years. Their marriage began to crumble. I heard about it through family channels. Marcus blamed me publicly, telling anyone who would listen that I'd sabotaged him out of jealousy. Privately, according to my mother, he begged Claire to convince me to help him. To lie for him. He called me 17 times in one day. I blocked his number after the 5th voicemail, all of them the same desperate plea. He wanted me to tell the military he'd been confused, that I'd misunderstood, that there had been some kind of mix-up. He wanted me to trade my integrity for his comfort. I changed my number instead. In the weeks that followed, I thought a lot about how often women's service gets minimized. How we're expected to be humble to the point of invisibility. How asking for basic respect gets labeled as arrogance or attention-seeking. I'd spent years downplaying what I'd done, making my service smaller in conversations, laughing off questions about my time in the military. I'd done it to make other people comfortable, to avoid seeming like I was bragging, to fit into a civilian world that didn't know what to do with women who'd done hard things. But recognition isn't about praise. It's about truth. It's about letting the record show what actually happened. And the truth was that I'd earned my call sign. I'd saved lives. I'd served with honor. Marcus had tried to steal that truth. And in doing so, he'd revealed something important, that some people will always try to diminish you to elevate themselves. The only way to fight that is to stand firm in your truth. 3 months after the ceremony, I received one last email from Colonel Patterson. Alex, it read, "I wanted to thank you for your restraint throughout this situation. Lesser people would have confronted Marcus publicly or sought revenge. You let the system work. You let the truth speak for itself. That's integrity of the highest order. Your call sign is still active in our systems because people remember. They remember what you did. They remember the lives you saved. They remember that when everyone else said it was impossible, you proved them wrong. You don't need a uniform to be Phantom. You never did. The call sign was never about the rank or the position. It was about who you are. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your example. And thank you for reminding us all what real courage looks like. Respectfully, JP." I read the email twice, then closed my laptop. I realized I'd never wanted revenge. I just wanted the truth to be told. And it had been. I tell this story now because I think it matters. Because I know there are others out there who've been mocked, dismissed, or minimized for their service or their accomplishments. People who've been told they're not enough while watching others claim credit for their work. You don't need to shout to be powerful. You don't need to defend yourself to people who benefit from dismissing you. You don't need to make yourself smaller so others can feel bigger. Your truth is your truth. It exists whether or not anyone acknowledges it. And sometimes, the quietest call sign carries the loudest weight. Marcus wanted recognition without sacrifice. He wanted the glory without the pain. He wanted to be seen as a hero without doing the hard work of becoming one. But real service doesn't work that way. Real courage doesn't need an audience. Real strength doesn't require applause. I learned that in a compound in Kandahar, moving through smoke and fire to reach 3 people who needed help. I learned it again in a conference room, standing up while someone else's lives fell apart. I'm still Phantom. Not because of a ceremony or a call sign in a database. Because of the choices I made when nobody was watching. He mocked my service, until the people who mattered remembered my name.